I have Dr. Cindy. I'm gonna call her Dr. Cindy because I can't really say her last name. It kind of throws me off, but I'll let her introduce herself. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be speaking on. She's a speaker for the TEDx event here in San Luis Obispo. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to get a little bit of synopsis on what she's going to be speaking about there in the theme of determination. And then we're going to have a conversation about a little bit about herself, what she does, what it means to have a human centric thought process on leadership. And so how that's how we're going to start today. And I want to introduce Dr. Cindy. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Well, Prince, it is such an honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me and having me on. And don't worry, everybody has a hard time with my last name. So my name is Cindy Urrutia, and for the record, I used to be a university instructor for 10 years, and I always had my students call me Cindy. It was much easier. So join the club. Cindy, I'm good with that.
Well, Cindy, let's hit the ground running today. Tell me, and I'm so curious as to how you came up with this idea of human centric leadership. So please, let's dive really deep into how this came about.
Thank you. Well, this idea of being human-centric isn't something that just came out of nowhere. It's been part of my evolution as a human in my career, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend. And the reason why I say it's been an evolution is one, I've always been interested in people, who people are, what makes people tick. So initially, when I was a young adult and I went to university for my bachelor's, I went to Boston because there's a lot of history in the city of Boston. And I wanted to learn about history and really understand how history gives us an insight into people.
Hmm.
With that in mind, I went to Boston University. I double majored in international relations, which requires a lot of history, but from a more global context. So I went from something national and regional in Boston to something more global. And my other bachelor's was in economics because I was interested in understanding material culture and socioeconomics and how everything intersects and how that was a driver for people. So, with that said, I really believed at that time I would be part of the foreign service, that I would go into diplomacy, but before doing that, I wanted to work in finance a couple of years, and I did. And wouldn't you know it, I never became part of the foreign service while working in finance. The company that I used to work for did a hostile takeover of an auction house, and I was part of the transition team to help bring in the auction house into our company. And during that time, I became interested in art. There was an auction house on art after all. And so I went and decided to take a couple of classes on art history. And one class led to another. And next thing I know, I'm getting a master's. And next thing I know, I'm pursuing a PhD. And next thing I know, I'm teaching. And throughout this whole process, I'm learning more and more about people, particularly from a cultural um, vantage point, but also keeping in mind what I had learned in terms of the international stage and economics. So I was very much so driven by understanding people, but also by helping people. So I was always wanting to help my students out, whether it be mentoring them, whether it be helping them do better, whether it be writing them letters of recommendation, what have you not. And eventually, I stopped teaching. I became a center director at a university. And that just gave me an opportunity to expand this idea of helping people while creating programming that spoke to what people's interests were. And as I was doing that, I really learned how important it is to bring the human to the center of who we are as leaders. A lot of times there's an emphasis on having productivity, on output, on performance, and those things are very important because, that's what pays the bills. That's what makes an organization tick. But that's not the only thing that's important. People who are happier in the workplace perform better. And what makes them happier in the workplace is that they are seen, that they are valued. There's actually data on this. By Market Research Foundation, I believe, said 12% of people, pardon me, it said that people are 12% more productive when they are happy. So then one of the things that I've learned along the way is to really pay attention to people. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their goals? What are their dreams? What are their desires? And to work with that. And as you put the human at the center, as you give people attention, as you really help them, especially the people that are facing the most challenges, either it's in the workplace or as a student, they thrive,
Mhm.
they grow. And not only do they benefit, but so do we. We get the fulfillment of helping somebody along in their path. So for me, as part of my leadership, I don't just want people to produce something, to perform. I want them to feel good in the process and to expand into their full potential. That's part of what it means to be human centric, to really understand that we are humans at the end of the day. And within this scope, is this idea that inspiration is great, but inspiration without results is meaningless. And how do you get results? You don't just inspire people, you do things that help them, things that are practical, that speak to their humanity. So, this is what I mean by being human centric and from leading from that place where we can find an intersection between productivity, between performance, output, and having that sense of human fulfillment and growth.
So, in this journey of development, of really kind of defining the human centric idea paradigm,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about how you have led from the front. Give us some examples of how you are leading from the front from that mindset.
Sure, thank you for asking. So, I used to have an administrative assistant who I would share with another leader, and she had a lot of challenges, and that affected her work. She always made a lot of mistakes, and it was a problem because a lot of it were financial mistakes, and I used to run a fairly complex and large budget. So her work was being it wasn't just that her work was suffering, but it was affecting my work and my budget.
Right.
And I remember being very frustrated. And I remember talking to her and constantly explaining to her how to perform her job. And for whatever reason, it just was not sticking. And I said to myself, okay, Cindy, something is not correlating. And I was so frustrated, but I was so determined to figure out a solution because I could not continue to have so many problems with my budget that I actually attended a 2-day workshop on developing even more supervisory skills, management skills, leadership skills, and I took the workshop. And when I took the workshop, I learned a couple of things about my leadership and my skills, but it
Hmm.
didn't solve my problem. It did not give me an answer. And then I remember one day, I was just sitting looking at her work and just really trying to understand her. And when I just took a moment to slow down and pay attention to her, the human, not the administrative assistant that somehow was not understanding how to do her job, I noticed something repetitively within her. She loves to help people. And because she loves to help people, she tries to find other ways to do things that are more helpful. And in her trying to be helpful and trying to be nice, she would skip over a lot of steps because she wanted to do something for somebody. And I realized, oh, that is her driver. Her driver is to bring joy to people and help them. And she doesn't always pay attention to details along the way. So I remember having a conversation with her, and I'm going to call her Reina. And I said, Reina, I love that you love to help people. Tell you what, I'm going to give you a carte blanche to do whatever you want on these activities. But I need you to do this first. Please follow the order of how you perform this specific task. If you want to change it while helping somebody out, please consult with me first because we want to make sure that, these invoices are processed and all these things get done. And I give you full reign to do whatever you want with this specific project with XYZ. And the moment I just gave her the green light to be herself, her eyes lit up. She still made a couple of mistakes along the way, but her performance started to improve because I told her, take ownership of the helping aspects of some projects we were working in, and that made her feel less stressed out while doing some of the repetitive accounting aspects. So what I did was I spoke to something that brought her joy, that
Right.
amplified her humanity, and that made doing a repetitive task not as daunting or perhaps boring for her. I don't know, but I did realize how much she was driven by help. And I also realized that when I needed something that was not administrative and I asked her for help, she thrived. So she felt useful. And as she started to feel more useful, like she was finally getting something right, her confidence went up.
Right.
And so did her performance, and we still had a couple of hiccups along the way, but it wasn't as detrimental as it was in the beginning because I actually spent 2 years very frustrated trying to figure out where I was going wrong, including taking some workshops saying, "Okay, maybe I'm missing something." And none of the workshops ever said, "Just pay attention to the human."
And Cindy, I'm listening to that story, and I'm actually kind of blown away because me and you, we've been in the workforce, and we done various things. And sometimes when you're in that environment, and you have deadlines and you have things that need to get done, it just needs to get done. And so there is usually no margin for error
Yes.
during that time. For you to take a couple of steps back and to identify that in another person really speaks volumes to the type of person that you are, in wanting to help people, as you coined it, thrive. And what I found is people are either thrivers or copers.
Mhm.
And you switched that light in her from, and you said it best, she wanted to help people. And when she wasn't doing that, she or while doing that, she missed a couple steps. I have to say that she was probably in that coping mechanism,
It
and
was.
then you believing in her and not necessarily coming down on and condemning her like this, pointing the finger, helped her thrive and to see something bigger in herself and bigger in the situation. Look at the whole picture holistically versus just her little small circle, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, so that speaks a lot. That speaks volumes to you, and this is exactly why I have Cindy speaking at the San Luis Obispo TEDx event here in April. She reached out to me a couple months ago, and at that time, I was still trying to figure it out. What was a small idea turned into this big idea, and it kind of took a life on its own. But I knew when she reached out, that I was going to have to get back to her, and it took me a little while, didn't it, Cindy? It took me a
It
little while to get back to
did.
you.
But you know what? Something said to me that I needed to reach out to you specifically, for that specific TEDx event, and something just said, "Don't worry about it. He's gonna get back to you when he gets back to you." I didn't it didn't feel pushed on my end. I hope you didn't feel any pressure
No,
from my end.
not at
It
all.
just felt like it was going to flow in the time frame it was going to flow.
And believe me when I say this, it is absolutely taking on a life of its own. And we're having a blast. Everybody, I think, is kind of is rallying behind it.
Yes.
And the speaker list that we have is freaking phenomenal. And
Mhm.
Cindy, as I've gotten to know her in the last couple weeks, especially, she has taken me by surprise. I knew she had a lot to give, and I was very interested in her topic of human-centric leadership. But Cindy can talk. Let me tell you, she can bring it. So, and in sitting and talking with her, I was like, I'm like sitting back in my seat, like, oh, she is about to bring the pain, so to speak. So you guys are going to be definitely uh, well nourished in information that the information that she's going to bring. Tell us a little bit more about your background and where you're coming from.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, I originally from a from an academic and professional, perspective, I'm originally an economist and, I have a degree in international relations. I received a master's in art history and I got a PhD in visual culture and I did a subspecialty in race and gender theories. As I've mentioned, I've always been interested in people and the human condition, but something that I've learned about myself, and we're always learning about who we are. Doesn't matter how old we are, how wise we are, we're always learning something about ourselves. What I've learned is that I've always been interested in ideas and people ever since I was a child. And I've had the opportunity, the grace, and the good fortune to be able to apply my interest in people throughout my life and my career, whether it's, as a former professor, as a university center director, as a podcast host, or simply a friend or, a family member. And for me, that's an important part of who I am because I don't want to have two personalities, the personality of who I am at work and the personality of who I am at home, because that for me, it's a bit of a disconnect. For me, I try to be the same person in both arenas. As y'all could tell, I'm pretty laid back, but when I'm in work mode, it's becomes a little bit more serious and you see that aspect of me, but I feel that it's that way in my, personal life as well. I like things to be organized. I love a plan, and I love having a vision for the future that's very much so present oriented, but is moving us forward and is bringing people with us for the ride.
Absolutely, and I'm so honored to have you and now call you friend, and to have somebody who is that way and so dynamic. I think is that's where you want to be. You want to build your circle and your network, and like I said, with this TEDx event, this is growing, and there's a lot of momentum behind it. And she is at the grassroots of something big. And there's been some TEDx's here before, but it was more student driven, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now the adults are taking over, and this is not going to be our first, or it's not going to be our last. This is the first of many. And so, and with that responsibility, you know, Cindy's at the forefront of that, and I'm so excited to have her and to be a part of that network now. So April 14th, make sure you guys make it out and make sure you guys are getting those tickets. Cindy has a podcast. It's called the Presence Podcast. Cindy, tell us a little bit about your podcast and where they can find you and what you talk about on your podcast.
Thank you. So I never imagined ever in my life that I would have a podcast. It launched last summer, and really it was just something that came to me as an idea. And I said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be fun to have a podcast?" Not knowing what it involved, what I would have to learn about technology and so forth. But I had this idea of having a platform where I interviewed people who I thought were very humane in the way they approached their leadership, who really paid attention to the human, not just the bottom line. And so I had this idea of starting a podcast around that, but I didn't want it to just be talking about leadership per se. I wanted us to really understand the person who is the leader and what is it that moves them. And I also wanted a podcast that was very much so grounded in who we are as humans. And I struggled for a while to come up with a name, a title that I thought would be fun and would encompass it all. And after a lot of, time of sitting with it, I decided to call it Presence with a play on the word Zen. So, presence without the Zen, if we take it in the traditional, spelling, is you're present. You're showing up in your full presence and your physicality. You're not looking at a phone, typing a text while you're having a conversation. We're fully present and engaged. And when we do that, we're really connecting on a human level. That was one. And then the idea of Zen is this idea of being very grounded and centered and to an extent peaceful with who we are in our leadership, with in our personal life, in our professional life, and to bring that aspect. In a way, it's almost spiritual because I do believe that when we are being human-centric leaders, it does require a certain consciousness about it. And when I'm talking about consciousness, I'm not talking about anything woo-woo or religion, but a really just awareness of who we are as humans, as spirit, as a soul in the body, and that aspect of us requires as much care as the body itself. So the title brought everything in together, and the podcast has been evolving as I'm evolving with it, and
Mhm.
as getting to, learn about people as I've brought in guests. But at the core of it is just really this idea of being a leader who connects with people. And when I'm talking about leadership, I'm not talking about just being in a managerial role. It means showing up with our gifts. You could be a leader in your community. You could be a leader in your household who takes the initiative to be your full self and show up for yourself and others around you. And that creates impact. Sometimes that's the type of people that create more impact. And it's not always about the title in and of itself. So that's what I mean by showing up with our leadership and really being present, very grounded in who we are and clear. This is who I am, and this is what I have to offer and share with you. And I'm grateful for what you're offering and sharing with me. So that's the concept behind the podcast. And as we go in with that energy, we're actually interviewing some really incredible people doing amazing things.
That's awesome to hear. You touched on some very high level concepts, and I love the play on the word presence, the being present in the Zen aspect of it. I didn't even put that together until right now, but that's a high level concept just in general. And then you talked about being grounded. And one of the things that I've been studying is emotional intelligence.
Mhm,
And part of emotional intelligence is being grounded.
mhm.
And only in the way that you can take it out of the woo woo is to talk about self concept,
Yes.
having a strong self concept and understanding who you are. Tell me what self concept would mean to you if you were talking to somebody and trying to teach somebody about how to be grounded in that way.
Wow. That's a great question, and I've never been asked that before, so thank you. One of the things that I would do is really ask someone to just quiet their mind, slow down, just take a breather, and just practice some self-awareness. Do you get nervous if you don't have access for your phone to your phone for more than 5 minutes? Do you get nervous if you don't know what's going on with the news? If so, then that means a lot of what's important to you is really outside of you. But if you could learn to be still and quiet with yourself, even if it's just 1 minute a day without needing external noise, then you start to have a bit of groundiness. You start to really get in touch with who you are. When you get in touch with who you are, you really understand what your no's are, what they mean, and what your yeses mean. I'm going to give
Mhm.
a very, I think it's a very simple example that I think everyone can relate to is we've all heard of the term of understand your deal breakers. And everybody has
Yeah.
different deal breakers. So what's a deal breaker for one person is not a deal breaker for another person. But you could have deal breakers when it comes to, for example, your professional life, your friendships, your romantic life, whatever it is. But when you get to know yourself, you start to understand this is what I'm okay with. This is what I'm not okay with. And when you understand your own deal breakers, what you're okay with, that means you have self awareness. That means you can ground into yourself. You can get to know yourself, but you have to have practice doing that. And sometimes just sitting in quietude for a few minutes a day, it could be in meditation or not, or it could be just going for a walk. Leave the phone behind, just be by yourself and start to get comfortable being by yourself a few minutes a day, it will have a positive impact on your life and on that groundedness.
Again, you're just you're touching on some other high level concepts here, and this is why we have discussions, for sure. Is because as we're pinging off each other, these things have to come up. If we don't talk about it, then how can you can't change anything that you're not willing to face. So if we're not talking about it and bringing up these high level conversations, then uh, the concepts will never get out there, and people will never be able to take those concepts and use them for change, so to speak.
Exactly. And if I may add, Prince, when you have self-awareness, it's easier to be aware of the other, meaning the people outside of you. And as we're talking about this concept of being a human-centric leader, you can pay more attention to the humans around you, who you interact with, when you have that sense of self, when you have that sense of awareness. So it's sometimes difficult to really fully embrace the other without first embracing ourselves. So as we basically lean in and just
Hmm.
our own humanity, our own our faults, our weaknesses, as well as our strengths and aptitudes. We're able to do it in others. We're able to help ourselves and we're able to help others. And that's part of that groundingness that we were talking about. And it has a ripple effect in our lives and how we can help people in addition to help ourselves.
Well, Cindy, we were talking about earlier, before we started recording. You're an avid meditator, and
Yes.
we were talking about how meditation changes your focus, and it brings you into a state of awareness. It brings you into the present,
Yes.
and we know that it's hard sometimes for people to get present, because there's so much distraction,
Yes.
and until you discard the distraction, you'll never understand who you are. And that's what you're talking about, is getting to the self, is understanding who you are at that core, not the persona, not the
Exactly.
ego, but who is Cindy or who is Prince. Understanding the self, drawing the boundaries, drawing the line in the sand, and saying, okay, yeah, we have these deal breakers, but you can't have a deal breaker if you're always compromising because you don't know who you are at your core.
Exactly. And in full disclosure, Prince, I had a really hard time learning what my own deal breakers were. It didn't come naturally to me. I used to be a busybody. I have always been a person who has a lot of energy. I've always had a lot of energy, and people would look at me like, Can you slow down?" And I didn't know how to slow down. I didn't know how to sleep in. I didn't know how to not be busy, and because I didn't know how to do that, I really wasn't in touch with myself for a very, very long time. And, we all have life throw little curveballs at us that forces us to slow down, especially when those curveballs are hard life lessons. And so, you know, I I am grateful for all the curveballs that have been sent my way because it forced me to slow down. And I wish some of those things wouldn't have happened, but they did.
Yeah.
And it's part of what's made me who I am today. So, in full disclosure, I don't want to come off as someone who just magically knows how to do this. It's a daily choice. It's a daily practice. It's a habit. And sometimes, we're better at it than others, but the more we do it, the more proficient we become at being more centered, more grounded. And for me, meditation is something that's helped, and something that you and I also talked about before you pressed the record button was that there's a lot of science that backs up why meditation is so powerful. There's a lot of changes that happen in your neural pathways, but that's another conversation. But what I can say in my experience based on my life, and I can only speak for myself, not others, I have found that it's something that's helped me. By the same token, I have found people who practice martial arts. It's something that really grounds them and gives them a lot of self-awareness. So it could be meditation or it could be a sport, it could be something else, only you know yourself, but anything that slows you down for a minute and makes you quiet the mind and the body is very helpful.
Absolutely, and I agree with that 100%. And here's another point that she pointed out to us is change and choice. And that is those things are synonymous together. You cannot change if you do not make a choice.
Mhm,
And so in Cindy, we all have to start somewhere, and I've struggled with that same thing, that same paradigm, mental paradigm myself is especially when you're trying to figure it out, you're having um, trauma, emotional traumas, you're having some codependency issues because of family dynamics, and all of that stuff gets suppressed and repressed, and it's not allowed to come up. But those are the things that come up when you're least expected. That that causes that self sabotage kind of cycle that we get into,
mhm.
and that's where at some point you got to get off the hamster wheel, and that's where your emotional intelligence has to kick in.
Yes,
And in order for the emotional intelligence to kick in, you actually have to make the choice to say enough is enough. And start drawing those boundaries and start grounding yourself. And so the true self can come forward, and that intuitive nature, which we a lot of us disregard the intuitive nature, is we discount that as that can't be me
Mm,
speaking, when
mm,
really that discard was probably the wisest choice.
yes,
That gut feeling that you had, um, we that's not it. We have to do it this way when really the way was your first mind, that
mm,
gut feeling that you had.
right. It goes back to, like, really getting to know yourself. That's why the quietude matters, and I can tell you how many times I have not listened to my gut and have regretted it deeply. And I can tell you that when I have listened, I've said, "Oh, thank you, God."
Yes.
God, because I listened. It ends up being like it ends up going in both extremes, and, there is something to be said about that aspect of emotional intelligence and really trusting ourselves,
Yes.
trusting our ideas, trusting who we are, trusting what we have to share, trusting our TEDx talk, trusting our leadership. And unless, somebody validates you, we often don't trust. But what we have to learn is that we don't need external validation. We have to know it
Amen.
strongly within ourselves that what we have to share matters
Yes.
because we matter.
It goes back to that strong self concept, and so there's two parts to self esteem: is the self concept and the self efficacy.
Mm,
And so your self concept is what you believe in yourself. That's the value that you think of yourself, and the self efficacy is your ability to think that you can, whatever comes your way, you can move past it or you can deal with it. And so
mhm.
that's how you build your self esteem.
Yeah,
And you have to work, or I found that you have to work at both parts of those. You just don't gain self esteem. You just don't gain value. That's not what is taught to us in typically in formal education.
yes.
That's life that usually teaches us that. And so you have to go out and you have to develop skills that aren't innate to you to be able to build off of that. Most of us don't even know what's happening because we don't even understand that it's running in the background.
Mm. Let me you know what? I'm gonna piggyback off of what you said, and I'm gonna give an example because I'm very open about this. So, I have type 1 diabetes, which means I inject insulin every day, and most people who meet me are shocked to learn I have type 1 diabetes. They see a thin woman, a fit woman, and they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yes, I have type 1 diabetes, but if you see me fit, it's because I have to work at it."
Right.
I am naturally on the slim side. That's just what, my body's natural makeup is. But I would have never stayed on the thin side had I not been mindful of the foods that I consume. If I don't make a choice to, have exercise be part of my daily habits. And also, I want to circle back to this idea about food because I'm very disciplined in how I eat. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoy food. I really do enjoy food. But I've learned that I can have one piece of toast in the morning for breakfast and enjoy it just as much as if it was two pieces of toast. I've learned that I don't need to put sugar in my coffee. I can still enjoy my coffee. Little things that really help support me having stable sugars. And there's times where my sugars run high and they have weird peaks. And that's
Mhm.
just that's just the nature of the disease. And I've been diagnosed as brittle, meaning any little thing can throw me off. But I've had to work really, really hard at being fit, having the discipline to say no to certain foods. And, like, for example, dessert, nobody has a sweet tooth the way I do. I love sweets, but, you know
I think I got you beat, Sydney.
I've disciplined myself to, if I order a cheesecake, out at a restaurant, I'll have 2 or 3 small bites, and then I take the rest home, and then I'll have, the full piece over a couple of days, and don't get me wrong, I wanna finish that cheesecake, but I've trained myself not to, and after a while, and after having done this for years, I actually feel quite satisfied and happy with just having, a couple of bites full. I call this the 80/20 rule. I'm 80% very disciplined, and then I give myself a 20% eat whatever you want. Otherwise, you're going to go on a binging streak and you're not going to take good care of yourself. So, but it's required a lot of discipline and it's been a choice I've made because I've been in the hospital. I've been in a diabetic coma before, and recovering from that is not fun. I'll tell
Oh,
you that.
wow.
It is not fun. So, everything is a choice. Everything is a choice. And when we understand that everything's a choice, then we understand how powerful we are because we get to say yes or no to things. Now, it
Yeah.
doesn't you don't have to work at them, but the more you work at it, the more proficient you become. And then you
Yeah.
just continue to make the choice over and over again. And sometimes you have a bad day and you're like, oops, I didn't make the right choice today. But then you can get up tomorrow and choose again to do something.
Absolutely. Yeah, you start stacking days and they start to build on each other. I heard somebody say the other day is you're making the choice to be 1% better every day. And that doesn't sound like a lot to the average person. Most people want to make drastic jumps in changes in personality, or they want to make drastic jumps in changes in their physique, or whatever the desire is at the time. But if you really think about it, if you're stacking the days
Mhm.
1% every day, and you do that over time, how much change can you affect that is sustainable if
Exactly.
you just go the slow and steady route or the sustainable route? Because you can't sustain 110 miles an hour. You just can't do that. Eventually, you're going to gas out. Eventually, you're going to have to bring it down into a reasonable range, in which is that you can maintain.
Mhm.
So we're going to shift gears, Cindy. We can go as deep as we want to go, but we have to do this in a different session.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, absolutely. That's just because 'cause you're fun to talk to, Prince.
and I agree. I can see that we can probably do this all day. We can have the meeting of the minds all day. Let's talk about the TEDx event here in April 14th.
Yes.
Um, Tell me, why did you want to be a part of this event?
Well, I never thought I would do a TEDx talk. It was just never in my, vision. Just it's not something that had occurred to me much like starting a podcast. I literally woke up one day and I said, "You know what? It might be fun to do a TEDx talk, and I think I have something to share that can help people and make a difference in somebody's life." So, as you mentioned earlier, I can talk a lot. And I have a lot of concepts that are working through my mind. So it's taken me a minute to narrow it down, and you're a part of it because you gave me some feedback on my talk, and that was very helpful. But I really do believe that when we think about this idea of human-centric leadership, we're speaking to the human, and there's different arms to this. It's not just one singular thing. So, to fully understand human-centric leadership, I would probably need 20 TEDx talks. But we're going to start with one aspect of it, which is how potential and determination intersect. And when I'm talking about potential is looking at people and recognizing what it is that they're good at and where their potential lies. So I'll bring it full circle back to Reina is what I'm calling this former employee, where it took me a while to recognize where her gifts and her talents were. But once I did, I was able to lean into that and help her expand her potential in different ways. So the talk does that look at that, and that's one aspect of being a human leader. But we're not going to talk about the whole concept of human-centric leadership. And then this idea of being determined. How do you bring determination into looking for potential? So I'm not going to tell you what the whole talk is about, But those are the 2 big themes, and what I want to say is that what I've learned, not just in my life, but also in preparing for this talk, is that determination isn't just a singular act. I am determined to do this. This is the steps I'm taking to be determined. But for me, again, everybody's different. Is for me, determination is something that's always evolving, growing, and changing. So much like I have changed in my career, in my life, the way I look for potential and the determination and the way that I use it to look for potential has evolved. And that's what my talk will be
Mhm.
about.
Isn't that beautiful? So theme
Mhm.
is determination. As you guys can see behind me is I have this big poster in the back um, on success and things that I wanted to bring to the forefront when I came up with this theme is how we can be determined, how we take the steps in determination. Selfishly, when I put this together, when I had this idea of having this TEDx talk, I wanted to speak on a TEDx for myself. And it is awfully hard getting on a TEDx event. Now that I'm an organizer and understanding how this process works, it's extremely hard to get on. And that's fine. And so I'm very driven and I want to move forward. And so I'm not going to take no as an answer. And so what happened was, is I decided to throw my own TEDx event. Well, what became what was selfishly a something that I wanted to do now has become about serving. It's become about uh, helping people to be successful. Uh, okay, she's back, and so with in now there's this movement that we have behind us. There's a flow behind us, and I want to bring that and highlight that and showcase these talented speakers, and Cindy is one of them. So I encourage you guys to make your way out for that event. You
Thank
have to be here. This is a destination spot. This is a beautiful place to be. Trust me, if you've never been to San Luis Obispo, you're going to have a blast. It's what everybody thinks of California for sure. So you have to be here.
Yes,
Support, support, support.
absolutely. Please support because Prince is not just speaking hot air, he is speaking the truth. I've had the honor and pleasure of getting to know some of the other speakers, and I'm just blown away. I am humbled and I'm like, "Wow, I get to share the stage with all these other incredible leaders and change makers." And it's really truly a beautiful thing, not just for us the speakers, but also for the community to have these ideas and these things emerging from the community of St. Luis Obispo. So I'm really excited and once again thank you Prince for giving me the opportunity and seeing my potential, since we're talking about potential, in terms of being on the TEDx stage at St. Luis Obispo.
Well, listen this up. It's been a blast, Cindy. Um, the event is April 14th. It's at the Performance Center at Cal Poly University. It starts at 12 o'clock, and we're going to go until 7 o'clock in the evening. We have 10 phenomenal speakers in that lineup. Like I said, I encourage you to come out. Cindy's been has been amazing to work with. We are having a blast collaborating with her. Um, so thank you, Cindy, for coming out for sure.
Thank you.
And we will get there.